big win for them to alleviate some of the pressure. I mean, obviously Fields has dealt with a lot of it this season, but there was talk that a bad loss last night. I mean, remember, they were 6-point underdogs heading into that game. A bad loss could have been curtains for everybody, or curtains for Eberflus, or the kind of loss that would get people fired. And instead, everybody's feeling good. There's a win on the table, and we get to go in a different direction.
Yeah, and so you mentioned Eberflus. Look, I personally wasn't really buying it. The Bears have never fired a coach in season. I know this year obviously was off to as bad a start as any had probably been, so maybe you change that. But for me, I mentioned the win for Eberflus, right? I mean, you're missing a bunch of players. Basically, your entire starting secondary is not in this game. Jaquan Brisker came in with a hamstring injury, so not 100%. The big thing for me was, and of course this is game plan specific, but the Bears had not blitzed on 20% of plays in a game this year. They blitzed over 30% of the time. You had the Greg Stroman sack, the DB nickel blitz. You had other moments. TJ Edwards came in on a blitz. I don't think they got a sack on that play, but it led to either an errant throw or something like that. They were clearly effective when bringing extra rushers. Again, you don't blitz Patrick Mahomes week 3 against the Chiefs or anything like that, but just when you're generating a league low pressure rate and never sending extra guys, eventually you got to change something. They did, and it really worked last night.
As impressive as it was for the Bears, and I think they did show dramatically different things on both sides of the ball than they had for most of the season, Washington were awful. Like, they started the game badly and continued along that furrow that they were digging. Like, play number 1 should have been a huge chunk play to Darnell Mooney, a corner route that they just missed. We talked about this before going on the air. It looked like bad ball location by Fields and then a bad adjustment by Mooney. Incomplete, but that was almost a coverage bust. Like, it was a wide open guy one-on-one. Like, play number 2, same thing. And that was like the first 3 drives, nobody was getting covered. Everybody was wide the hell open. I don't know what Washington secondary was doing.
It was truly insane, right? Not to take away from what the Bears did. Obviously, you guys are wide open, you hit them, and they get yards after the catch and all those things. But, I mean, Richard Sherman talked about it at halftime. Like, safeties and corners not on the same page of who's supposed to, take the deep third on a certain, in cover 2, or all these various components of guys just not knowing where they're supposed to be. I mean, there were Bears receivers with 10 yards of separation on 4 different plays on the first drive. Even on the second drive, you had Mooney on the crosser we just talked about, kind of an errant throw from Fields there, but he was as wide open as I've seen a player all season, and that kind of happened the entire night. They eventually bench Emmanuel Forbes during that game, and I actually think Danny Johnson, who comes in, usually plays more in the slot. Yeah, he made a difference. He had a couple pass breakups and was better in coverage. Yeah, it was bizarre. I tweeted this out earlier this morning because I remember it last year too. The Commanders were 27th in EPA per dropback allowed from weeks 1 to 5 last season. From weeks 6 to 18, they were 4th in EPA per dropback allowed. They had a massive turnaround, and they didn't even have Chase Young last year. So maybe they can do it again. But just bizarre that the last 2 seasons they've gotten off to these terrible starts. I mean, Chase Young had 11 pressures last night, and you still kind of felt like the front 4 was not winning against a Bears offensive line that was shuffling players in game. Shout out Tevin Jenkins, who was awesome, allowed 0 pressures, had an 83 grade. But yeah, it just their defense getting off these extremely slow starts with all the talent they have is bizarre.
And the reason it felt like the pass rush wasn't really a big factor for Washington is because it didn't matter when the coverage is that bad. Like, there's only so much your defensive line can do when everybody's open immediately from the snap. And you look at the PFF coverage grades from like the secondary last night. I mean, Forbes 45, Danny Johnson 36, Cody Barton 47, Kendall Fuller 35, Percy Butler 39. Like, almost everybody in the back end. Like, the best grades were Benjamin St-Juste with a 58, Derek Forrest with a 56. Like, not good. And, Emmanuel Forbes got benched. What he got benched for was essentially the same play as Kendall Fuller made later in the game for that last DJ Moore touchdown, right? Which is going for that pass breakup, kind of gambling a bit, not getting there, and then not securing the tackle when you miss. Forbes did that. It was one of the that's one of those cardinal DB sins. And Kendall Fuller did the same thing later on. Just like an absolute disaster from that secondary from start to finish in that game.
Yeah, we also, you probably in today's NFL scoff at the idea that corners, guys come in at 160, 170, and we're like, it doesn't really matter. It's such a, ticky-tack sport now. I mean, DJ Moore and A.J. Brown are the worst matchups possible for Emmanuel Forbes at this stage in his career. Maybe you can put more weight on, but, I mean, you could have argued maybe it was OPI on the play where DJ Moore basically just pushed Emmanuel Forbes out of the way, caught the ball, and ran up the right sideline. But I don't think it was a push off. I think he just put his shoulder into him, and Forbes kind of went flying. It's a month into their careers. I know you didn't like Christian Gonzalez as much as I did, but I thought that was an insane pick. One pick before Christian Gonzalez. It's early, but anyway.
Yeah, the Forbes thing was interesting because you could see some plays on his tape where being 160 showed up. Like, it didn't happen very often, and usually he offset it by being feisty and physical and, fighting through it. But you could find those plays in routes where, there's contact or a guy leans on him, and a guy leaning on you when he outweighs you by 40 pounds or whatever is a problem. Like, he's going to bash you out of the way, and there's not much you can do about that. It's just physics. You lose when it comes to that contact competition, and that's you could see that happening a bit to Forbes at the moment. The other thing, I think, it created this very bizarre sort of stat line for Justin Fields where he passed for 282 yards, 4 touchdowns, and DJ Moore had almost all of it, 230 and 3. DJ Moore had 230 of the 280-something yards. Cole Kmet had 42, and then Robert Tonyan had 10. 3 guys. He only completed passes to 3 players in the entire game, and it felt like everybody was wide open all game long. Fields was spreading the ball around. It really was just they didn't stop DJ Moore.
At all. I mean, truly the entire game, he was running wild, whether it was intermediate, deep, short, his ability to take those screens and shake off blocks or shake off tackles, and make plays in space. That was on display last night. I mean, the dude runs very, very hard. You talk about him as one of those guys, like a Debo, where he turns into a running back when he gets the ball in his hands. Like you saw that last night. I would say, too, though, I think Darnell Mooney had the best zero-catch game I've watched in a while. Was creating separation. I mean, he was creating separation off the line of scrimmage on, like a half dozen snaps that I remember from the broadcast angle. Excited to watch the All-22. But, he was getting open. We talked about, the one missed earlier. But, yeah, a hilarious stat line. I think Sam Howell completed passes to 11 players, and Fields was just 3. And, yeah, I mean, Cole Kmet, just quick shout out. I know, look, he looks a little clunky. He can't separate against man coverage. Not the best athlete in the world, but you play a team that plays a good bit of zone. He can find soft spots, sit down, sure-handed, make rumble and stumble a little bit. I don't know. I think we've fallen in love with the move tight end. That's like a fluid, smooth athlete. The guy is a throwback inline guy that doesn't make it look pretty. Has been the highest graded, I think, tight end in the red zone dating back to last season, and just continues to score touchdowns. So, he's not perfect, but I think, that extension in hindsight now, I think looks pretty good. He's worth a mid-tier tight end contract, in my opinion, at least.
The other weird thing from the Chicago offense point of view is I don't remember the last time a team completely ran out of running backs. I don't. There was a bizarre aspect to this is, Herbert gets himself injured on that freak play where it looked like a turf injury, but it was a grass field. Tried to come back and play through it, and when he cut on that ankle, his ankle just went, no, not a chance. Take a seat back on the bench. We're done today. And so they're giving carries to the fullback, so Carrie Blasingame, he's bounced around the league a little bit. They said, I think during the broadcast, he'd only had 3 career carries up until this point. He must have carried the ball a ton in preseason because I remember him carrying the ball and being impressed that he's actually not a bad running back. Forget the blocking element of being a fullback. He can carry the ball and do some damage. He was getting handoffs, and he looks pretty handy.
You're putting me on a platter here. You've seen him carry the ball in the SEC East when he dominated as a running back at the Vanderbilt University. I was freaking out about the 3 lifetime carries, which Kirk Herbstreit, now Michael, said about a half dozen times. He was not born on draft night in 2020 and in 2019, whatever it was. He was a SEC running back for, I think, 3 years as a starter. So, it's a good element to have. He did, I remember preseason Minnesota games, he had a bunch of highlights and long carries. Yeah, he's a good player. I mean, can catch the ball, can pass protect very well, and is good as a lead blocker as a fullback. But, it was crazy. I mean, Travis Homer going down. You mentioned Khalil Herbert. He gets the ball, goes throws to the right, makes a cut, and just like his leg gives out.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Hey, it's questionable to return." I was like, "No, his night's over. Like he is not coming back in this game." And they were able to bleed out the clock and kind of get 5 yards in a cloud of dust with Blasingame, which was huge.
I'm just looking at his preseason stats now. It's actually, so he did get some work with the Vikings, but it's actually mostly as a receiver. He still only had a few carries, 8 carries for the Vikings in preseason games. He had 8 receptions as well, though, one preseason, and those went for 68 yards with a couple of touchdowns in there as well. So, I mean, it's still, no matter what way you look at it, if we go post-Vanderbilt career, it's still an incredibly small sample size, but he does look good with the ball in his hands. Like he's, in terms of like an emergency running back, he's probably about as good as you're going to do.
It's true. It's true. And I mean, I think it was also, they mentioned it post game, but Justin Fields, I think at that point, they had a couple design carries, QB power early to the left that got 7 yards, like on the first or second series. But at that point in the game, too, he said, I knew I needed to carry the ball more and look for opportunities to keep the clock moving, get 5-6 yards, and get down. And I think he's also grown in that area, sliding, getting out of bounds when he was supposed to get out of bounds, or staying in bounds but not taking a huge hit when that is appropriate. It was a timely use of his legs, not it's all we have in this offense. And I think it looked pretty good most of the night. I don't remember a non-successful run for Justin Fields the entire game.
And then the other crazy stat that came from this game was tweeted by our guy Nathan Yankee last night. The Washington Commanders dropped back to pass 55 straight times without a designed run tonight, from 8:49 in the second quarter until the end of the game. That's the most for a team in a game that PFF has ever seen. So dating back to 2006, more than 15 years, that is the most consecutive designed, called passes. Obviously, he scrambled a few times. This also includes nullified plays, plays that they called a pass and whatever happened, nullified, penalty, etc. That is wild. You hear about teams abandoning the run. I mean, they literally abandoned the run. They said, we do not need to call a run play for the remainder of this game.
I mean, what is that? That's basically, 2/3 of the game, if not more, just based on the game clock. Yeah, it was crazy.
And based on volume, I mean, that's a full game, right? 55 dropbacks is insane.
Yeah, no question about it. Which is funny too, because it's all right, we're going to do that, but then we're going to kick a field goal on 4th and 2 from the 10-yard line or whatever that was. So I mean, look, it was working. It made a whole lot of sense. They were able to, Chicago's still sitting back in soft zone. They're converting long third downs. They're attacking over the middle of the field. A lot with Jahan Dotson and Logan Thomas and Curtis Samuel. They were bizarre too with their distribution of wide receiver snaps. On the Curtis Samuel touchdown, Terry McLaurin's not on the field for first or second down. They do nothing. And then on third down, he comes in, the safety bites on his slant, and Curtis Samuel is literally walking to the corner of the end zone uncovered. He had Byron Pringle out there. He had Jamison Crowder getting targets. I don't know. It was interesting to say the least. But yeah, that was a wild stat. I think their pass rate over expectation was 30% or higher. Obviously they were in obvious passing situations, but just completely abandoned the run. But it worked.
It did, and it honestly feels like their best offense at the moment is actually just going, screw it, hurry up, desperation mode with Sam Howell, right? And as much as you're not going to call design runs, apparently, Sam Howell is going to get you a few scrambling, and when Sam Howell takes off scrambling, it looks like Tim Tebow. It's bizarre. He just bounces off people. He's got this insane combination of more strength than you give him credit for, and an absurd balance to keep bouncing, pinballing around off players and somehow still trucking in vaguely the right direction. There was a play I tweeted during the game where he hit his own offensive lineman with the hit stick and decked him on one of these scrambles where he's just careening off players and annihilates his own tackle. That dude is strong with the ball in his hand.
Yeah, no, he has a low center of gravity, and if you try to tackle him high, on a sack, he's going to shake it off and find a way to fight through it. There was one play where I think DeMarcus Walker had him dead to rights in the backfield, and he went low on him, hit him in the thigh, and Howell just bulldozed through it. But we also did see, the continued issue with him. I don't think it was a good performance for their offensive line, don't get me wrong, but the last night was a clinic in how sacks are a quarterback stat in so many ways. He was holding onto the ball forever. I think there was a stat on the prime, screen that his 80% of his passes come after 3 seconds. It's the highest in the NFL. A team that had, I think, 2 sacks in the season, that had less than 1 sack per game dating back to week 1 of 2022, had 5 sacks last night. I mean, that is as clear evidence as you could possibly have that you don't always blame the offensive line and don't always look at how good the defensive line is. I mean, the quarterback is just not getting rid of the football.
No, absolutely. So the other thing, so Sam Howell ends up getting sacked 5 times in the game, which brings his tally to the season up to 29, which puts him on pace for 98 over the course of the year. That actually went down based off that game last night. Like, this was below average for him. But the most the quarterback has ever been sacked in a season was 76 by David Carr. David Carr, who owns 2 of the top 3 most sacked seasons of all time. But Howell is on pace to obliterate that number.
When you're being compared to expansion team Texans, David Carr in a sack category, you are doing something wrong, no question about it. I mean, look, credit to the Bears. I think the interior for them played as well as played in a very long time. Andrew Billings has been, I think, one of the better signings in free agency from a value standpoint across the entire NFL. Top 15 grade for us among interior defenders. But for me, the big one was, I mean, Gervon Dexter played like he had not played to this point this season. He was an athletic specimen coming out of Florida. A lot of draft people were huge fans of his. You watch his college tape, and he was a 2-gapper and doing a lot of read and react, but just his get-off was like uncannily slow. And last night, he was in the backfield very quickly a bunch of times, had 6 pressures, over a 20% pass rush win rate. I mean, a lot of young guys, I mentioned, I think it's like a Ryan Poles win. Their rookie class, including Gervon Dexter, were making differences, across this entire game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch because Washington, I think, is a combination of not a great offensive line and a quarterback who might be the most sack-prone quarterback in the NFL since Randall Cunningham. When Cunningham had that insane season where he was sacked like 1 million times, his sack rate was 25% or something insane. Like, honestly, Steve has this tweet busy going viral right now. Like, what's the craziest stat you've ever seen in your life? That might be it, where Randall Cunningham, I think, was sacked on 25% of his dropbacks or something insane in the 1980s. Like, Howell, I don't know what his sack rate is right now, but it's off the charts insane. That dude is a sack magnet.
Yeah, I know his I know his pressure to sack rate was like 35% plus coming into this game. So if you get pressure on him, you have better than a 1 in 3 chance of bringing him down. I mean, look, he also stood in the pocket. I think made a bunch of very nice throws, attacking the intermediate area of the field. I mentioned, I think he's very good over the middle. There was one play, I think it was a key 3rd down, maybe a 2nd and long, where he went through his entire progression, then came back around to Byron Pringle and delivered an absolute strike over the middle in a spot where only Pringle could catch the ball, away from coverage. Like, so him holding onto the ball sometimes when he does have a clean pocket leads to good things, but he probably just needs to bail more often. He is a pretty solid runner. Like you said, he's bouncing off contact and all those things. But, at the same time, I mean, he's like, he'll stand in there forever and just take shots. And I think I am probably of the perspective of, like, again, you got to clean it up. It's an unsustainable rate, but you watch a lot of young quarterbacks today that bail from clean pockets. Like Kenny Pickett and Zach Wilson, some of these guys, they have a perfect pocket and they bail. I'd rather have the Howell who just sits in there and just takes shots and delivers balls, because he did have a lot of nice throws last night.
No, he did. I mean, as much as it was kind of a crazy game, he's still a pretty good quarterback. It's just that one flaw is a huge one and glaringly obvious. And it's usually not like a terminal problem in terms of, yes, sacks are negative plays for the offense, but they're a lot less negative than like throwing interceptions, right? So if that's your biggest problem, it's probably not a terminal issue for a quarterback, but his might be so far off the end in terms of outlier extreme that it could be. Like, he's so bad at taking sacks that it's actually a catastrophic issue and offsets a lot of the other issues.